Hello and welcome back to another video. And before I begin with this video, let me just address the elephant in the room. Yes, I did try to bleach over my box-dyed red hair. Yes, I do look like a Timu strawberry lemonade, but I am also still styling and profiling. Let's move on. Glee was a teen show on Fox that ran for 6 seasons, and if you ask me, that was entirely too long. Once you start bringing like completely new characters in, or have to change the entire subplot of the show, it's time to move on. But Ryan Murphy does not handle criticism well, nor listens to what people tell him, and that is who created Glee. And I'm going to sound like I hate the show, but it's actually very dear to my heart, especially with the nostalgia and Corey Monteith. 14-year-old me was so sentimental about this grown-ass man, despite the fact he had been dead for months before I ever even watched the show. I don't think this show could ever run for 6 seasons today, mostly because it was kind of ridiculous, and also no new show ever lasts 6 seasons in 2 days' worth of streaming. Glee was definitely a product of its time, somehow woke, but yet still so sleepy. It was one of those shows that basically checklisted important social issues to claim to be progressive and groundbreaking, but the storylines were poorly done. Many were problematic, so it makes sense for the cast to be just as controversial. There is something people call the Glee Curse because of how many terrible things had happened to the cast of this show. A few weeks ago, an actor from the show, Kevin McHale, who played Eddie, even tweeted about how disrespectful it is to claim there is a curse around this show. The Glee curse is not real. This is just what happens when you take a bunch of no-name actors and skyrocket them into stardom in less than a year. And today I am clearly going to be talking about some of those things people reference from the Glee Curse. And I'm going to start off with the star of the show herself, especially in her eyes, Lea Michele. And if you've never actually watched Glee and are just one of my loyal subscribers, love y'all, you may know Lea Michele as a woman who can't read. In 2025, there was an ongoing joke about how she didn't know how to read. This whole thing had started by the One More Thing podcast in a 2017 episode. The hosts were going over the late Night Rivera's memoir, Sorry Not Sorry, and in the book she mentions that during her time on Glee, Lea Michele refused to improvise scenes with Tim Conway. The host joked that maybe this was because Lea Michele had director Ryan Murphy feeding her lines because she could not read. And then it went further because Lea Michele only used like emojis on social media or like sentences with many obvious spelling errors and grammar mistakes. People also point out that her education is likely behind because she was a child star on Broadway. Whether Lea Michele can read or not, that is the least controversial thing about her. 5 years before this theory had made its round, Lea Michele was trending for her racism allegations. Co-star Samantha Ware, who played Jane in season 6, would take to Twitter to call out Lea Michele. After Lea Michele had tweeted about the Black Lives Matter movement in support of George Floyd, Samantha wrote, LMAO, remember when you made my first gig a living hell? 'Cause I'll never forget. Samantha had came out and said Lea Michele allegedly told others on the set that she would defecate in her wig if given the opportunity, and this started a long call-out train towards Lea. Davia Snell is an actor who had a small part in Glee, and he also happens to be black. He quote-tweeted the Black Lives Matter tweet from Lea and claimed, girl, you wouldn't let me sit at the table with the other cast members because I didn't belong there. And I'm not black, so I cannot sit here and say that this man overreacted. If he took it as a microaggression, then that's how he feels. But he was an extra for the show, so if he had tried to sit with the main cast, it would make sense for Lea Michele to say this, especially given the diva bitch attitude people say she has. People, including her co-workers she worked with for years and years, including Heather Morris, who played Britney S. Pierce in the show. She states in a post online that Lea Michele was unpleasant to work with, and I'm going to talk more about Heather later, so I really don't care about who she thinks is unpleasant to work with. Melissa Benoist and Alex Newell, two Glee stars in the later seasons, would go on to like that tweet from Heather. Another Glee co-star who spoke up was Amber Riley, who played Mercedes, one of my favorite characters in this show. She said that while she didn't believe Lea Michele was racist, she was extremely proud of Samantha Ware for speaking up when she was uncomfortable. All this backlash had made Lea Michele lose out on her brand deal with HelloFresh. She would finally speak up about everything, starting with the wig statement by Samantha Ware. And you notice how I didn't say apologized? Because, yeesh, this statement was rough. She would write on social media, "Well, I don't remember ever making this specific statement, and I have never judged anyone by the background or color of their skin. That's not really the point. What matters is that I clearly acted in ways which hurt other people. Get to your point. Why are you making everything about you?" Everything about this screams insincere, and it's quite obvious she also did not write it. She added, "We all can grow and change, and I have definitely used these past several months to reflect on my own shortcomings. I listened to these criticisms, and I am learning, and while I am very sorry, I will be better in the future from this experience." Lea Michele, if it was her who even wrote this, uses language that shifts the blame onto others. The accountability does not fall on her. She makes sure to let you know that she doesn't actually even remember saying this microaggression, just in case proof may come out and she can't backtrack saying, "Oh, I'm sorry you felt that way," is way different than coming out and admitting what you said was wrong and stating how actually sorry you were for what you said. And this was 6 years ago, so I cannot speak on how she is today. Hopefully growing up a lot since then, since she is a mother now and also 40 years old. I also want to mention that the statement was sold to People magazine exclusively before she posted it on Instagram. She was able to profit off of racism and hate. Oh, and also outside of the Glee cast, stories about her include Monica Mascatow alleging that Lea Michele had called her ugly to her face when she was hired to play her lookalike at a Glee theme party in 2009, and I know I butchered her name, I'm sorry. And then her co-star from the Broadway revival of Fiddler on the Roof, Craig Ramsey, called her a despicable, horrible human being who has lost touch with reality. He added that the entitlement just took over her body. So, take those statements how you will. Next up is Matthew Morrison. You may know him as the creepy Glee Club teacher, and he might be just as creepy in real life, depending on who you believe. Matthew Morrison was a judge on the TV show So You Think You Can Dance, a show I had no idea existed before today. He was suddenly pulled from filming in 2022, and it was revealed he was fired from the series after he had an inappropriate relationship with a female contestant. Nothing sexual or illegal happened, but she said she had felt uncomfortable due to his flirty messages he sent. And while Matthew Morrison denies he was being creepy, he did acknowledge his failure to follow competition production protocols, preventing him from being able to judge the competition fairly. He would take to Instagram and read the message he had sent to this contestant. It read, "Hey, it's Matthew. If you don't mind, would love to get your number and talk you through some things." And I guess I could see that being considered flirting because he asked for her number, but to fire him over that feels crazy to me. So it makes me feel like there's more to it that no one is stating. Earlier, I had mentioned Corey Monteith, and he really does not have any controversies except the one that led to his tragic death. And to me, an addiction is anything but controversial. It's a serious problem that needs a solution. But when you play a teen jock on a show made for literal children who find you to be the heartthrob of the show, even if that's not how you were written, it is a big news story. Corey Monteith played Finn Hudson in the show, quarterback at McKinley High, despite only being 15 years old, which is even older than he was when his drug problem started in real life. Corey Monteith had a lifelong issue with substance abuse, only 12 years old when it began. He dropped out of high school at age 16, and later he would state at that point in his life he was using anything and everything as much as possible. He had been given an ultimatum when he was a young adult after being caught stealing a large amount of money from a family member. He either had the choice to get clean or go to jail. That's when he would move cities and get cast as Finn Hudson in Glee. After that, he had apparently made an extreme effort to stay away from substances. Lea Michele was his girlfriend at the time, an on-screen love interest, and she was a big part in making sure he was committed to sobriety. That's why it was a shock to everyone when Corey Monteith was found dead in his hotel room at only age 31. He had overdosed on heroin and alcohol. His attempt to stay off drugs resulting in his lower tolerance to the drug. Corey Monteith would be the first of the 3 main Glee cast members to die, but he would be the one with less trouble when it came to the law. Mark Salling would take the lead on that, no stranger to breaking it. And I want to apologize in advance, not to him, but to y'all, if I end up calling him Mark Salling throughout this section, because I genuinely thought that was his name up until like 4 weeks ago. In 2013, Mark Salling was accused of sexual battery, assault and battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Roxanne Gozella alleged this all occurred while the two were dating 2 years prior. When they would get intimate, Roxanne was under the belief that a condom was being used. According to her, when she found out Mark was lying to her, she confronted him and he pushed her to the ground, resulting in injuries to her head and knees. Salling took to Twitter and said, "I always have and always will appreciate your support. Terror and intimidation are things I'll never subscribe to. Love y'all so much." His PR team would then release the following statement: "There is no truth to this. It's a textbook case of a disgruntled girl looking to cash in on a TV star's success. We turn the rest over to Mark's attorneys and have no further comment." Roxanne eventually dropped her sexual battery claim, and Mark Salling agreed to pay her about $2.7 million. So obviously there was guilt there. In 2016, Mark Salling was accused of rape by a woman. She alleged it had happened 4 years prior when they went to get intimate, but she changed her mind, stating no multiple times. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's offices opted not to file charges against Mark Salling, considering just how little evidence there would be after 4 whole years. This anonymous victim had admitted she was finally able to come forward after the set of charges pressed against Mark Salling only a year prior, his most well-known charges and ones that would be his endfall. Because on December 19, 2015, Mark Salling was arrested on suspicion of owning child abuse sex material, over several thousand photos and videos. His ex-girlfriend was the one who would tip off the police about these images. When they did a full investigation into his electronics, it had actually been 50,000 images downloaded from April to December. And when I was researching into the arrest documents, I read the title to one of the videos, and I just had to stop and hug my son before I could continue into this filth. He wouldn't plead guilty until 2017, and part of his plea deal was that he would only have to serve 4 to 7 years in prison, while also having to register as a sex offender, along with other stipulations. And this loser had to just hurt his victims one more time because he never got to prison. He would kill himself before then. 6 miles away from his home on January 30th, 2018. Because of this, the entire sentence was thrown out and a restitution agreement of $50,000 to 10 individuals who had been identified in his illicit holdings was deemed null and void. And why a man who possessed this much child abuse sex material was out on bond is still a question I would like to know. And I hate to go from something that serious to the rest of these controversies on this list. I wanted to go in order from the deaths and when they happened, though. And everyone who watched Glee knows that Naya Rivera is next. And I know this will be a touchy subject because she was a very loved person in the community, but regardless of that and her death, she was still a Glee cast member and she had a problematic past. In 2017, during Thanksgiving weekend, Naya Rivera was arrested for domestic battery on her then husband. He had called the cops about Naya's alleged out-of-control behavior and requested that a police officer be dispatched to the scene. He had told the officer that Naya Rivera was getting physical and said that no weapons were present. She was charged with misdemeanor domestic battery after she allegedly hit her husband while taking the 2-year-old son for a walk. The charges were dismissed after he decided not to continue to pursue them. Naya Rivera is not the only Glee cast member with domestic abuse allegations. Blake Jenner also makes the list here. And forgive me if I'm saying her last name wrong, but Melissa Benoist had played Molly in Glee while Blake Jenner played her love interest Ryder. And much like Lea Michele and Corey Monteith, they also ended up together in real life. But this relationship was anything but perfect. In 2019, 2 years after their divorce finalized, Melissa took to Instagram to share her domestic violence story, and while she didn't outright name Blake Jenner directly, the timeline matched up and fans quickly put everything together. Melissa would describe how she went through emotional manipulation that had escalated to physical violence, including being slapped, punched, and having a smartphone thrown at her eye. This would cause a torn iris and lasting vision damage. Blake Jenner came to social media a year later and admitted that was him who had done that to her in a long post. He would also allege that the abuse was mutual, Melissa also leaving bruises on him, which is a post that Heather Morris had liked. And that brings me to her controversy I want to talk about. And I'm going to end on her because her one little controversy really does not compare to most people on this list, excluding like Corey Monteith and maybe Matthew Morrison, depending on the whole story. But it is something I'm very passionate about. Heather Morris had injected herself in the wall on pedophiles on the side of the pedophiles. In 2020, Kevin McHale retweeted a post about the show's 2010 episode, A Very Glee Christmas. The original tweet noted that the episode came out 10 years ago, and it included a group photo. The original poster had covered Mark Stallings' face with a vomit emoji. I already talked about what he had done to be perceived this way, but Heather Morris apparently did not think that possessing child abuse sexual material warrants something as terrible as a vomit emoji over his face. I mean, what a harsh insult. Won't anyone think of the pedophiles? Heather Morris will. She replies to Kevin's retweet and writes, "The vomit face on Mark's emoji is offensive." No, Heather, I think owning 50,000 images of abused children is offensive. You had all that smoke for Lea Michele being a bitch just months prior, but now here you are defending a literal monster because you were on a show together. Had that been Lea Michele with her face covered in vomit, you would have ignored it or even retweeted it to be shady. And you gotta be just as dumb as that character you portray on Glee to double down in defense of Mark Stallings when called out. She keeps tweeting and making it worse. We did not lose just 2 cast members. We lost 3. And it is so incredibly tough to have to act like the third one is invisible, because even though his actions are unjustifiable. He was a part of our family at one point, and he was mentally sick. Thank you for treating me with such disrespect and unkindness during a time that I can't even get through a day without bawling my eyes out at the loss of my entire Glee family. Thank you. You're welcome, Heather. No one says you have to ignore the fact Mark Salling had died because he killed himself, because he had 50,000 images of child abuse sex material, and he didn't want his victims to get justice or reparations. You just don't need to have to basically defend him and say that he isn't vomit inducing, because he is. And that's the end of my video. Thank you for listening to me yap, and as always, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and feel free to like or even subscribe.